can't stop, can we? Welcome to a VOG Roundtable with no D, because I couldn't figure out how to spell Roundtable at the beginning. But we hadn't done one of these in a while. My name is Bobby Blackwolf, and with me is...
Hey, it's Rob Roberts from Orange Lounge Radio, Sunday nights here at the network.
Yes.
Good to be here.
So we didn't want to wait, or at least I didn't want to wait until Sunday to talk about Taiko no Tatsujin's coming to Xbox Game Pass, Rob. Like, this is huge.
You know, our show is rooted in music game history. You know, Dark Sakura, Loki, myself, we all met playing DDR. So this news about Taiko no Tatsujin coming to Game Pass, huge. Big news. I'm so excited.
That is the biggest news that Microsoft could have other than this other big news. So we didn't want to wait to talk about it. We didn't think y'all wanted to wait to talk about it. So let's talk about this big... We thought Zynga being bought was too much, and we're like,
it was a lot of money.
And then Microsoft decided to announce its intentions over the next year and a half to acquire Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion, with a B, as in Bobby Blackwolf, dollars.
They couldn't just throw $300,000 more to make it a nice round 69. Nice billion.
No, they didn't want to be that nice. According to The Verge, Microsoft's going to be acquiring Activision. It's Microsoft's biggest push into gaming, and the company says it will be the third largest gaming company by revenue, behind Tencent and Sony, once the deal closes. So this is not the biggest one. Activision used to be the biggest publisher in the world, or the one with the most revenue in the world. And I guess like now Tencent has kind of taken that mantle, and that was kind of news to me until I saw this article. So what was your initial reaction when you woke up this morning and saw this? Because even I woke up and it had already been announced by the time I woke up. So I know that
my first reaction was I picked a hell of a day to sleep in, because I had the day off from my day job today. So I wasn't even up until noon your time. It was 9 a.m. here when I finally got up, and then saw that news. And honestly, I was like, all right. It's funny because we just did predictions on OLR a couple nights ago, right? And you know, I don't remember if you did something similar on your show where you were talking about like actual predictions, but it's interesting that this never came up. Like the whole, like, what is the end game for this whole Activision disaster that Bobby Kotick created? And I think maybe there was a lot of unknown about, well, what's going to happen through the court process, and you know, the different lawsuits that California brought up and all this. And I think maybe a lot of our minds were in that place and never really thought that Activision was up for the taking. I think, you know, as much as we've joked about Microsoft buying everybody, I think a lot of folks expected Microsoft's next purchase. I think a lot of people were looking at something like Sega or a Japanese-rooted company to really cover their weak spot, not ABK. But it really sounds like Phil Spencer really took an opportunistic approach and saw the opening to go for it and went for it.
Yeah.
And if you're Phil Spencer, it's a brilliant move.
Yeah. So we are in chat over at twitch.tv/VOG Network. This is where we tape our shows. This is not going on a podcast feed. It's probably going to go up on our YouTube, though. So you'll be able to watch it there. But we do have a live chat room. We are reacting to people's live chat rooms. And Chewy240 says, my first reaction was Kotick gone immediately. Unfortunately not. This actually solidifies, unfortunately, that Bobby Kotick is going to be there for the next 18 months, because he probably has some kind of contract that says he's going to steer the ship until this merger goes through, which is going to take the end of fiscal year 2023, which is about 18 months from now. And then he'll be gone. But he's going to be there for 18 more months. So now it's like, now we just got to make it through these 18 months, apparently.
Yeah, the news on that end is incredibly frustrating. I think a lot of us wanted to see Bobby Kotick, you know, held accountable for the situation that he's created over the past 30 years. I think I think a lot of people were hoping for that comeuppance today, that, you know, Bobby Kotick was going to get thrown out on his butt. And it does seem like that is what's happening at the end of the day. So it is I mean, and it's very vague, right? Like it's taken a lot of like insider reporting, and Bloomberg says this, and Wall Street Journal says this, and I think they finally pieced together that Bobby Kotick is going to be gone when this is all said and done. We just have to get through the whole when all is said and done part. But I think there's also a lot to be said about who is the CEO on paper and who is the CEO in reality. And I think just because maybe this whole process is going to take 18 months to play out, I don't think this necessarily means that Bobby Kotick is going to have quite the same authority that maybe he has today, because we know he's a lame duck CEO now. Yeah. And that's a term I'm going to continue to use for Bobby Kotick. He's a lame duck.
Now, the other thing that I don't know much about is in these acquisitions, or whenever you're doing anything that affects the stock market, when you're going IPO and things like that, there is a time called the quiet period. And during this time, and I know this because my day job, we work on a platform that just acquired another huge platform, and I do software development, and I was supposed to develop one of these integrations between these two platforms. But because they had announced the acquisition but hadn't gone through with the acquisition, it wasn't finalized yet, they were in a quiet period, which meant literally they could not talk to each other. So I had to develop things without being able to have access to the company that was being acquired, to any of their engineers, to any of it had to be publicly facing documents. So while we can unfortunately sit here and say, well, yeah, he's the CEO on paper, but really somebody else is calling the shots, probably not, because Microsoft's not going to be able to come in and tell Activision what to do until the deal is finalized. It is actually illegal for them to come in and take over the business early on.
There's an interesting kind of situation here is that Microsoft already has a working relationship with Activision Blizzard. So there is that already, like they would not be able to physically separate for the 1.5 year period. That's not possible because the work that Activision does impact Microsoft. It's the whole reason why all the CEOs came out when this news first happened and said they basically were denouncing what's going on, right? So I think there is a certain level of, I get the whole like legality and things, and I think that would essentially mean Phil Spencer cannot sign off on changes that happen at ABK and that sort of thing. Like, yes, that's still all happening from Bobby Kotick's perspective, but I still think there will be things that position the chess pieces for that acquisition. For example, after Microsoft got Bethesda, I believe before the ink was dry, we saw Bethesda games on Game Pass pretty quick. You saw more after the ink was dry, but I want to say we saw quite a few games suddenly show up on Game Pass within a month.
Yeah.
And then the rest kind of showed up later after the deal was done.
Yeah.
So
they can talk a little bit right at that point, but I think when there's like being investigation, there is a quiet period time, which is not up until the ink drying or the ink going on paper, but it is during some of the investigation, the exploratory, probably some of the regulations, investigations, because they don't want Microsoft to pump down the price or pump up the price. They just don't want that type of stuff to happen. But I also have never actually been a part of a merger and acquisition other than being employed at a company that was acquired. Like, that's as close as I've gotten. And Same. I didn't know until the ink was dry. By the way, your paycheck's coming from somebody else tomorrow. But I know that these type of things exist. Questbuster. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was interesting because I did work for a company, not games related or anything like that. I worked for a company for 14 years that started to make some very unpopular decisions. Nothing of the magnitude what we're talking about with ABK, a completely different type of and category of unpopular. And employees were, generally unhappy with some of these decisions that were being made. And I was one of them. I put in my 2 weeks notice. A week later, that company announces they're getting bought, the one that I used to work for. And what was interesting about that is because of the buyout, all of the decisions, which included contracts with another organization. So I have to speak vague for obvious reasons, but all these things that were on the were canceled because now another company is the one that's coming in. So they're not held to the same legal stuff that my old company would have signed up for. I thought it was very fascinating. So essentially the decisions they made that were not popular were being reversed by the buyout. And I actually had my boss at the time ask me, so does this mean you're going to stay? And it was like, sorry, the damage has been done.
Yeah. Questbuster says the stock experienced weakness in the past year because of the scandals and the poor performance of Call of Duty, which made it a good target. The deal also has to face regulatory approval. The current administration leans antitrust, especially against big tech. So that is kind of also the biggest wild card is, do we get into monopoly territory, which does not necessarily mean it's the only thing out there. You can still be considered a monopoly even if you have competitors. But I'm also not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly how all that works. I just know that it's not the fact that, like, just because PlayStation exists doesn't mean that Xbox can't have a monopoly or can't be seen by regulators as making a monopoly. And so that's another thing we're going to have to see play out over the next 18 months. And Questbuster even says one of the questions that antitrust regulators might ask is how far Microsoft might restrict Activision's games from other platforms like Sony's. And it's going to be interesting to see how Microsoft handles that. We know they already have a good relationship with Nintendo, and Microsoft games will go to Nintendo, but we haven't really seen that recently, day and date, coming to Sony's console. And how does, now that they've got both Bethesda and Activision, traditional third-party publishers, what kind of bones will they give to keep the regulators off their back? Yeah. I think Microsoft themselves, they were like, it's going to be Xbox and PC, period, paragraph, end of story. But regulators may say, no, you got to play nice.
And I think, Microsoft's been the target of these types of antitrust talks before any of this, and it has not even as much to do with gaming. And I think that might be the thing that they're really looking at as well, is does this give Microsoft too much in the home entertainment electronic space, and the way Windows ties into something like Game Pass and so on and so on. I think it's pretty easy to show that there's plenty of competition in the video game, publishing and creating and platform space when it comes to, Sony, Nintendo, and, Microsoft's going to even point out much smaller things like arcade one-up machines and Intellivision. Those are all alternatives when it comes to, home entertainment and gaming. They're all on the table. But I think the question is going to really be about, does this make like Windows and Game Pass, and how Game Pass is built into Windows, and the availability of other types of platforms like that, does it make it too much? I think there's going to be conversations really centered around that too, that I think people are not really looking at it first. I think people are talking about the Sony Nintendo part, but not so much is Microsoft too big in the electronic consumer space? Yeah.
So to give some context as to what Microsoft was when they were going in front of antitrust, it was actually about browsers. So this is back in the 90s, early 2000s. There was when the web was in its infancy, and we were connecting to the internet and usually using text. But then there was the web, and there was a browser called Netscape Navigator. And Netscape Navigator was huge. It took the brand new internet that now was going to consumers. It had been military only for about a decade, but now that the consumers were getting on the internet, Netscape Navigator was taking the world by storm. And Bill Gates is like, I want to do that. And so Internet Explorer came out. Now, that would have been all fine and dandy, but what Microsoft did is they bundled Internet Explorer in with Windows 95 or 98, one of the two. And you couldn't remove it. And they even put things in Windows to make it very difficult to use Netscape. So even though Netscape existed, Microsoft did not have the only browser on the market because of their market dominance in the OS. The federal regulators came in and said, no, you can't do that. And Microsoft lost. Unfortunately, Netscape had also lost because of Microsoft won the war. essentially. And so Netscape is no longer around. Eventually, Mozilla Firefox is like a very, very much descendant of Netscape, but everybody was using Internet Explorer for 5 or 6 or 7 years, even though it was no longer bundled in with Windows. So that's when they're looking at a monopoly. It's not are they the only player in town? It is, are they making themselves out to be the only player in town and making it very difficult for other players to come in on the same space?
Will World of Warcraft be pre-installed on new PCs?
No. Will Candy Crush be installed on new PCs? That's more likely.
Candy Crush, the new Solitaire.
Yeah. I think actually when I installed Windows 11, I think Candy Crush was on it, and I deleted it.
I think it actually is in the Microsoft Store. Yeah, I think it is.
So, but the thing about, and so we're also getting into some of the stuff like Chewy for 240 is saying, I wonder how many Blizzard games will work okay on the Steam Deck. If Phil gets Game Pass on the Steam Deck, that could be incredible, and stuff. Remember, Steam and Microsoft are buddies. They're best buddies, and because Steam runs on Windows, and that's where Microsoft is Xbox and PC because they own both of those platforms. Now, some people are worried about Mac. I have seen that already because some, like World of Warcraft, I believe, runs on Mac. I believe, and they're like, I wonder if this is the end of the Mac. And I will also say that the new Microsoft, the Microsoft that exists today, they're buddies with Apple. They're on the Mac. You can get Microsoft Office on the Mac. Visual Studio Code, like a lot of actually developers at Microsoft use Visual Studio Code on Macs in Microsoft.
That was hugely controversial when Microsoft Office went to the Mac for the first time. Look up the video of that announcement. It was something else. Yeah. So I think you're right. And Microsoft investing in Steam in that, not financially, but in partnerships, that is how they're keeping the antitrust spotlight away.
Yeah.
That's a great example of what Microsoft is doing to get rid of that illusion of antitrust or whatever, from their perspective. If they have a partnership with Steam and actually invest in what is essentially their competitor when it comes to Windows Store, right? Then it makes it look less of a monopoly.
Yeah. And everybody's pointing out in our chat, Candy Crush is already installed on Windows. So we've already got that partnership.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, and other people were like, the scale of this is huge because we're thinking of like the Call of Duties and the other big Activision titles, but like also near and dear to our hearts as more vintage gamers, Sierra Online's entire catalog is owned by Activision. Because it was Vivendi Universal that bought Activision, because this is the second time Activision's been bought. Because Vivendi Universal bought Activision and changed their name to Activision, because nobody wants to say Vivendi Universal all the time. But Vivendi Universal owned the Sierra catalog. So now, by the transitive property in 18 months, King's Quest and Space Quest and Leisure Suit Larry is all going to be owned by Microsoft. And
Double Fine could make a new King's Quest game.
Yeah. But here's also here's a good silver lining. Like we're talking about like the regulatory stuff and the Bobby Kotick side, but let's put that aside. We can come back to it, I promise. But you notice with Activision, in terms of the games that they put out, they really need every game to be a hit. And we're seeing this like with Square Enix. Like if you're not a 5 million seller, you failed, and stuff. Microsoft, they don't really think that way. And so this may free up some of those studios that are owned by Activision to be able to take risks on a smaller IP or a new IP and not be pressured so much to match the success of a Call of Duty or a World of Warcraft or an Overwatch. They can take a little bit more risks and be a little more free and not worry so much about selling a million copies, because that's not how Microsoft works. Microsoft's in the Game Pass business. Primarily. So this could also be a good thing in the long run. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've definitely seen the takes today on that. Oh, Toys for Bob maybe gets free of Call of Duty from this whole thing and can go back to making, the types of things that they were doing before. And that could be very interesting. Yeah, I hope, I think that's what a lot of us hope, is that some of these, studios that have been held prisoner by Activision on Call of Duty can get freed up to do these other kind of exciting projects, whether they be Microsoft IPs, and things that Bethesda once owned. I mean, it's going to be very interesting in that regard. But yeah, also kind of the other way. And as I just pointed out, it opens the door to Double Fine taking a property like Space Quest if they wanted to, and making a new game potentially. I think we're getting really ahead of ourselves. We have those discussions because, again, we're talking about this not even closing for 18 months.
Yeah.
But and this is where we, even though you talked about the quiet period and all that, those discussions about what happens and what can we start moving the chess pieces in order for once that goes through, that talk can start happening.
Yeah.
And what is the roadmap? What does the 5-year plan look like for this whole thing? That can absolutely start happening even before this is finished, because everybody's going to assume that this will finish. So we may not have to wait as long, but I just think the result of any of that is going to be so far out. It's just going to be one of those like pleasant surprises when we see it, and it will be one of those, oh, this is because of the merger, and oh, this is coming back. But Call of Duty is still a behemoth moneymaker, and now presumably going to be a Microsoft exclusive in 2023.
Yeah.
Important to point out, not this year, but in 2023, presumably a Microsoft exclusive. But would Microsoft maybe lessen the grip and look at doing maybe every other year, and and different types of I think Call of Duty was every other year, right?
So
the other one,
Call of Duty was every year, but they had 2 developers working on it, so each game had a 2-year lead time.
That's it. So it will be interesting how Microsoft might leverage some of their other purchases into that.
Yeah, and Taiko asked, what will this mean that anything made by Activision will be Xbox only? What will happen with the existing Activision games that are on PlayStation consoles? So the good news is we actually have historical evidence of how this is going to go, because we have Bethesda and we have Mojang, both companies that have been bought by Microsoft after having a great relationship with PlayStation. So what would happen if this goes through, and what's going to happen during 2022, is any game that is contracted right now to come out on a PlayStation console will come out on the PlayStation console. If that game is PlayStation exclusive, hi Deathloop, how you doing? It's going to be PlayStation exclusive, even if Microsoft has purchased the publisher. Microsoft will honor all existing contracts, and they probably had to in the terms of the sale. Going forward, what they have said is we will make those decisions on a case-by-case basis, but they're going to be Xbox and PC exclusive, at least in the beginning. And then, maybe a year or 2 or 3 out, maybe they'll think about putting the Ultimate Edition out on another console, but they want the Game Pass subscriptions. They want you to buy it on Xbox. They want you to buy it on Windows.
And that's something very important that people need to remember in all this discussion about, how screwed is Sony with this whole talks and everything like that. If you're still thinking in terms of PlayStation versus Xbox, you're not playing the same game that Phil Spencer said years ago he's playing. And remember that. This was not a move about Xbox and Xbox Series X and that whole sort of thing. This is absolutely a move about Game Pass.
Yeah.
And Game Pass is so strongly positioned now, and has been for some. We said this back at that E3 when Microsoft came out on the stage, which is weird to think it was all those E3 agos, and it was you get a studio and you get a studio and you get a studio, right? It was Microsoft lighting up all 7 of their studios that they had acquired. This is just now the ace of spades in that whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. Now the question, in my opinion, is no longer PlayStation versus Xbox, but it's Sony, wake up. You've got to compete with this. Yeah. Phil Spencer's playing a different game than you are. And that's no disrespect to Sony, who I don't think, like, this isn't they still have such strong exclusives at
Yes.
Sony, and they have been making acquisitions and things like that. It just feels like Sony is just like a couple steps behind right now because we're not seeing that Game Pass competitor. Although, if the tea leaves are to be believed, it sure does seem like Sony's about ready to roll that out, aren't they?
Yeah.
Plus, Bobby, you'll be able to speak to this much better than I can. But Sony still has that big investment in VR that we expect will be very successful, that Microsoft essentially not playing that game. So I don't think Sony is like ruined by this. Sure, it's going to suck to not have Call of Duty in 2023, but I don't think that spells doom for Sony by any accord, because nobody's saying that about Nintendo. And wouldn't that same logic apply?
Yeah.
Nintendo succeeds because Nintendo is the greatest game publisher in the business, or game maker, I guess, so to speak. And that's what Microsoft's modeling.
Yeah, and Nintendo, they made up their own game. In terms of like they've even said back in the day when it was Reggie Fils-Aimé, our competition is not Microsoft and Sony, our competition is Netflix. And, they decided to go their own route. They're like, we don't want to make the top, graphical console. That's not the game we want to play. They can play that game. We're going to do what we do best and basically go through that. And that's why they are successful, and they are willing to work with Microsoft and Sony, and Microsoft's willing to work with them. Sony, not so much, but Microsoft's willing to work with Nintendo. That's why you see Cuphead coming to the Switch. Outer Worlds came to the Switch. Minecraft is still very much supported on the Switch, and all that. So I think I agree with you. The Microsoft's kind of changed in the game because I think they realize that, physical better hardware is going to be hard to come by maybe, or it's going to be something that we're not, as a society, we don't need anymore when we have good bandwidth and we have a lot more internet space to do the cloud. And Questbuster even says the Lame Duck CEO did an interview with GamesBeat today on the deal and mentioned that competitors were moving into more AI and cloud-based spaces. For him, going with Microsoft gave ABK all of those resources to remain competitive because Microsoft has all the cloud infrastructure with Azure. Their big competitor there is Amazon with AWS, but Microsoft has all those things, and Activision probably can't afford to keep up with all that because they make games, whereas Microsoft makes infrastructure, and they mainly, like Microsoft's main business is business infrastructure, server infrastructure for businesses.
I thought it was interesting, too, in another interview, Kotick was trying to shift the whole, well, how did this happen? And why did Activision suddenly become something that was purchasable? Was trying to shift the blame on Overwatch getting delayed and Diablo getting delayed and something else underperforming. I don't know if it was WoW or something like that. Kotick was really trying, or Call of Duty, actually. It was also another big one he called out. Because of that combination, that's why. And it's like, way to not take any I mean, of course he's not going to say, oh, it's because of the harassment issue. I fucked up in creating a work safe place and all that stuff. Sorry if I wasn't supposed to use F-bomb.
Oh, you're fine. This is not my show.
But it's just one of those I think Kotick is certainly not going to. But to what points would he score by fessing up? Yeah, it's the workplace environment that I created was driving all of our talent away, including 44 people or whatever it was that was off the books in the past couple months, or whatever that recent story that came out the last week was.
Yeah. So
also, I want to point out, Tiger Claw says, what other big studio is left out there since
lots.
Activision was one of the big ones?
Lots.
EA is going to be the big one that a lot of people are going to think of.
Ubisoft, Square Enix, Valve, really, 2K, 2K. So there are plenty.
Take-Two? Yeah,
Take-Two. Yeah, because Take-Two is 2K. Yeah,
and I don't see Sony making a move for any of them.
No.
Now, Sony would be smart to try to on those strategic partnerships that are keeping, say, Square Enix's Final Fantasy 16 exclusive to their platform. Sony will keep making moves like that where it makes sense, but I definitely think Sony has to get caught up in the Game Pass competitor space because, yeah, the days of the hardware and everything are starting to feel more and more numbered.
Mike Def says, Konami, LOL. Yeah, right. You got to remember, and I keep saying this every time, and nobody wants to listen to me, Konami's doing just fine. They just don't do much in the video game space that you're in anymore. They're doing just fine with pachinko and slot machines. Konami is doing just fine. They don't look just fine to you because all you care about is the Castlevanias and the stuff like that. And by you, I mean the royal you watching this. But Konami as a company, they're doing just fine.
Yeah, the former K-Set, basically. Everything that would have been like K-Set in the old, organization. That's the stuff we wish somebody would swoop in and buy. But yes, their pachinko and casino business makes Konami a lot harder to buy and a lot less lucrative for a company like Microsoft or Sony to grab. I don't think either one of them want to get into the casino gaming space.
Yeah. Taiko says Konami might as well sell off their entire gaming library since they're not doing anything with it. How do you know they're not doing anything with it? They could be making pachinko machines based on their dormant franchises.
Well, and that rumor about Konami leveraging their IPs for money, you know the big one, and it involves Sony that won't go away no matter what. So, I mean, it's certainly still plausible that Konami is going to leverage those IPs for things. I mean, heck, they did it with the NFT thing, didn't they? Yeah. They're willing to put up their IPs. They're willing to put up art to the highest bidder. So I think that's Konami's story at this point. Yeah. But I don't see the company as a whole being sold, which is unfortunate because it's a crappily run company too. Yeah. But we all know that. Yeah.
And I mean, Nintendo, remember, is also it's not owned by anybody. And Microsoft thought about buying Nintendo, and Nintendo's like, LOL, no. And there's some interesting ways that they have phrased it. Like other people have phrased it and said it was more Nintendo laughed in their face. And then other people are like, even at Nintendo, like, no, we didn't laugh in their face. They brought it up and we're like, we're not interested. And we all went our separate ways. So yeah.
Did you see the retweets from 2012 that were making the rounds today?
No,
where,
I didn't.
IGN and one of the others had run reports about could Microsoft be buying Activision? And it was, I think there was another suitor that was named besides just Microsoft. But now some retweets of those old 2012 tweets are going around, which I find very fascinating. It is maybe Microsoft did sit down in the room with Activision in 2012 and got laughed out of the room. I'm using my quotey fingers. Yeah. But 2012 was also just around the peak of World of Warcraft, and I think when Blizzard was coming into the picture and all that, I don't remember right when that Blizzard merger happened. That might have actually been later. But I think Activision was in a much different place then. And I think we're hearing now and we're seeing now a lot of what allowed this to happen was Kotick's failures opening the door enough for the board to not be able to laugh them out of the room.
Yeah.
Because the board knows they've got a problem on their hand, even if they're sticking with Bobby Kotick, which, by the way, let's also point out, there's going to be no place for the board that stuck by Bobby Kotick in this whole thing. Yeah. They will be gone.
Yeah, because they're getting bought out
anymore.
And I think what
they get huge money. So
yeah, no, I think Microsoft's buying everybody's shares at $95 a share, and right now it's $85 a share. So if you buy stock in Activision now, they'll buy it back from you for $10 more each share. It's probably different now, and I am not a stock broker. Do not take investment advice from Voice of Geeks Network. We are not professionals. Or in any of that. I've never traded a stock in my life, not even going to the moon like everybody else did last year. But yeah, like because the stock went down.
He's my stock expert with this stuff. Loki did all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like Activision stock dipped, which is why when Microsoft's like, we'll pay $95 a share, and they're looking at the stock market and they're sitting at 60. Like you have to listen to that. And now Activision won't be the publicly traded company anymore, and they have not they're going to report up to the management that's at Xbox, that's currently there, and Yeah, it's now we've got to like just sit for 18 months and play the what if game and the speculation game, just like we did with Bethesda for a bit, where it's like, is Deathloop going to come to this PlayStation? Is it not? Is Starfield coming to PlayStation and Nintendo? Is it not? You know, and having all the vague comments because Phil Spencer couldn't just come out and say it because, once again, the quiet period. They don't want to manipulate the stock and make it look like they're doing something they shouldn't that would get the federal government to possibly reject this merger.
Well, and the big question I think people are going to be asking with this particular one is going to be Overwatch 2, I think is the big one, and Diablo 4 to a similar extent, which I know are both Blizzard, but they are hugely anticipated titles, which Bobby Kotick is attempting to also blame their delay on this happening. So I think those are the big ones where the question is, will Overwatch 2 be available on PlayStation? I sort of think that's probably already been worked out, but there is nothing that's going to stop an exclusive map, character, costume, you know, things to sweeten the deal for the Microsoft Game Pass platform specifically. Loot boxes with Game Pass, absolutely. That's going to be a thing. I guarantee it. One of the free giveaways they'll do is those Overwatch cosmetic packs once a month for Game Pass people. Absolutely.
Yep, because they do that for Halo Infinite now. They were doing that. They do it for Phantasy Star Online, which is not a Microsoft thing, but they've got that. Somebody, we were talking about Overwatch, and somebody in chat, and I think it's already scrolled off, was like, maybe this is the real reason that the Lego Overwatch 2 thing was delayed. I would say no, because I bet Lego learned today the same time as the rest of us. Like they don't share that type of information with their third-party vendors. The third-party vendors find out the same day as everybody else.
I'm curious what happens to something like Overwatch League. That's the big, you know, and does Microsoft want to or have any interest in trying to use what's been built there for other types of competitive gaming? I don't know. That's to me, that's the one that I'm not sure I know what to predict in that space, because I do feel like Overwatch League has, between the pandemic and what's been going on with ABK and all these issues, I do feel like that whole thing has probably not reached the potential that it could have. And to be fair, I think the pandemic is to blame for a lot of that, because I think folks would have expected Overwatch League games to be played in stadiums by now. That's what the vision was originally, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious what Microsoft's kind of thought is on that. Because that's something that now they're kind of getting that's outside gaming a bit. You know what I mean? Like it's gaming, but it's not.
They had the Halo League. Like they actually did run Halo esports stuff.
That's true.
So they had a lot of that.
But nothing on the same level.
Not on the same scale.
Overwatch League is. Because I think it did mainstream better than anything similar.
And I'll tell you why. Because Overwatch was popular in Asia, and Halo was not so popular in Asia, and that was where Overwatch struck gold because of StarCraft. Like they got in the market because of StarCraft, because StarCraft was essentially, and probably still is, the national sport of South Korea. I'm pretty sure. Like I'm making that up, but like it's huge. Like that's your Super Bowl was the StarCraft stuff. And so Overwatch, being the same people that put out StarCraft, they knew how to market it to the Asian countries, and learning more watching what League of Legends was doing as well. So I think that like they could elevate Halo up to that, because Microsoft tried, but being so US centric as Halo fans are, maybe Europe centric, it never got to the point of Overwatch League. But I remember like Halo was one of the first esports I saw on TV, thanks to that old cable TV channel that recently came back, the G4, originally in 2002, before the Tech TV merger. And there's a whole other, I could talk all about that merger and how that happened and take from a outsider's perspective. But Arena, one of the games they played was Halo. And in fact, they had the first U.S. National Halo Championship on G4, taped at G4 Studios in Los Angeles. And they flew the top teams in and gave a prize on G4. So it's not foreign to Microsoft. They just didn't hit the mainstream appeal that Overwatch has Halo's never been on ESPN, but now they've owned the company that's been on ESPN.
Originally, or what you were saying kind of made me think of this, is that in a similar vein, on things that Microsoft suddenly has a little more interest in that isn't necessarily directly gaming related, but it is BlizzCon.
Yeah.
What happens with that? Now, the thought is, Activision still allowed BlizzCon to kind of operate as it was because Blizzard's fans, before anything that came up in the last year, have been very, passionate and so forth. I'm very curious how that ends up playing out. Do we see a BlizzCon again? Do we see Microsoft slowly getting infused into some of that as well? Hard to say, because, this whole kerfuffle in the past year and the decline of World of Warcraft also happening have really put Blizzard in a tough spot, I think, with a lot of folks. But let's hope Microsoft and Phil Spencer and the better leadership of Phil Spencer can really save the day and be just what Blizzard needs in that regard, and give Blizzard the space to create, the great games that they were known for historically. I'm really rooting for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think actually, like, if they could keep it its own thing, because Blizzard has that just long-term identity, that would be good, and maybe take that model for other things. Because remember, QuakeCon exists and has existed for a long time, and that's Bethesda. That's id Software Bethesda. So maybe taking that model for other things, and kind of using it once we get back to in-person events, and there, it's the world is better. But maybe take that model and have multiples of them, so you can get all the monies instead of forcing everybody to choose this one event for all of your properties. Black Compat asks, thank you. Hi, Black. Hi, how you doing? It's good to see you. Hey. Everybody go follow Black Compat. Shout out to Black Compat. How much leadership restructuring do we expect after the acquisition completes? Does Jen O'Neill come back? I'm not gonna assume for any specific person, but I will say that when Bobby Kotick came in, as when Vivendi purchased Activision, he cleaned house, and he got rid of the entire executive leadership of Activision when he came in. Because remember, Activision didn't buy Vivendi bought Activision, and so when Bobby Kotick came in, everybody was gone. That is probably going to be the same thing here. All of the C-suite C-level people at Activision will most likely, once this is done, they're going to get a very, very nice golden parachute to the tune of millions of dollars, and some people are even thinking billions of dollars for Bobby Kotick, and then they're going to ride off and into the sunset and do something else, which is upsetting a lot of people, because they don't want him to ride off into the sunset with billions of dollars. They want him to pay for what he's done. And it probably won't happen because of just how the legal entities of companies and buyouts and publicly traded companies, just because of how that is. Microsoft would have to invest a lot in investigations to find a way to get rid of him for cause, in which he'd only get a couple $100,000 instead of a couple $100 million.
I'm going to agree with your take, Bobby, that a lot of the C-suite executives at Activision should be really nervous if they're not already out the door, which seems to be the case in many cases. And I think that is probably evidenced by the fact that with Microsoft's press release about the whole situation, they had a little picture of Microsoft's kind of leadership structure there, which showed a strong amount of support with women-led positions and so forth, which was cool, but not a lot of Activision faces on that chart, right? So I think there's a hidden message there. At least that's what I'm taking out of it. As far as Jen O'Neill goes, I think that's a very interesting question. I don't think she comes back. I just don't. I think if she was paid even $1 when she left, I think it gets weird for her to be able to just come back. I'm not so sure the gamers as a whole. I mean, I can't profess to speak for everyone. Yeah. I'm not so sure people would want to see her back. That's not a knock on her. Absolutely not. I think people want to see what she can do elsewhere. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are rooting for her. And so I think for her to fall back into this might actually come as a disappointment. So I think a lot of people are rooting for Jen O'Neill's future and what she's going to do. I don't think it is as part of this whole thing. Another interesting point brought up with chat, Questbuster says Mike Ibarra, who was the other CEO when that all went down, sent a smiley tweet when he heard the news and points out, of course, where did Mike Ibarra come from before he was at Blizzard? Microsoft. So he's in a very interesting spot in this whole thing.
And congratulations to you, Mike Deft, for being in a very interesting spot. Because it's obviously the same person. Mike Deft does also, to our last point when we were talking about what happens with BlizzCon, Minecon has still been happening, the Minecraft convention, and since Microsoft bought Mojang, Minecon still has traveled the world and done different things and now been virtual, but they haven't really messed with that. And they've owned Mojang for quite a while, so if they were going to mess with Minecon, it would have been messed with by now. So I think that's the good news is we actually have historical evidence of what Microsoft has done in the past, in the recent past, maybe not the far past, because if you go back to the far past, that's when Bill Gates was looking like a Borg and is trying to assimilate everybody, and he was the big evil. Microsoft's not the big evil anymore that we assume them to be.
Bill Gates hasn't been with Microsoft for like over a decade at this point. Yes. I think it's worth pointing out. Yeah.
And like the other people, like the Satya Nadella has only been CEO for a little bit of time. So like Steve Ballmer's already out. He was the person who came in after Bill Gates. So we've had several people at the helm of Microsoft since Bill Gates was around being ruthless. Which, if you're going to be a CEO of a large corporation, you do have to be a little bit ruthless. You can make it look like you're a nice guy, but you are actually ruthless. Even like your favorite CEO, if you have one, who you think is such a nice guy. No, they're ruthless because they have to be. In order to be successful at that level, you have to be ruthless a little bit.
Bobby, a perfect example here, because I think a lot of people feel very positively about Phil Spencer and the changes that he's made at Microsoft and so forth, and feel good about the direction of the company under Phil Spencer. I know I feel great, and I think Phil Spencer's a very relatable guy, and I think he's been a good thing for this industry. I really do. This move to purchase Activision when their weak point about their corporate culture was exposed, that was a ruthless, shrewd move.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, as frustrating as it's probably going to be if you're not a Microsoft fanboy. In fact, you're an anti-Microsoft voice in the room. You're probably not feeling so great today with all this. But if you Phil Spencer, this was a brilliant move.
Yeah. SJ100 Matt in our chat, he's here for the Taiko no Tatsujin talk because that's really the biggest news of the day.
I was not lying at the beginning of the stream. I really am excited about that coming to Game Pass. Let's
go.
Let's not let that headline fall out today. There's still some other exciting stuff coming to Game Pass.
And they didn't even announce it. That was actually leaked by like somebody at The Verge. They accidentally got the image, and I think they were going to announce it today. And then this news came out, and they're like, all right, put the brakes. We'll put this image up tomorrow or the next day, Because like all PR departments in gaming today, anything they wanted to announce today, they were like, let's put pause on that and not announce it today. We're going to wait a few days. But SJ100 Matt says, we'll see what happens when the DOJ and FTC, what they'll have to say about the purchase. This may be a situation where they will have to, Microsoft will either have to split the Xbox Studios division off from Microsoft, or Microsoft will have to sell off assets to make this deal work. So there's a lot of question marks as to what they're going to be able to do and what they may have to do it. Facebook we've seen become Meta, and they've started to have to kind of spin off their division. Oculus being its own division, Instagram being a different division, and not necessarily all being Facebook. So we've seen that happen in the tech industry very recently. So who knows what this is actually going to look like in the end. But I will say, since I brought up the metaverse, apparently Microsoft bought this, and some company and some journalists out there say this is because they are doubling down on their commitment to the metaverse, which I'm like, so what exactly is the metaverse at this point? Like, what do you think the metaverse is if you think this is Microsoft doubling down? So
yeah, I is the metaverse in World of Warcraft? I don't know. Is it Azeroth? I don't know. No. I think it's doubling down on Game Pass, and what Phil Spencer has made no secret from years ago, he believes is truly the future of gaming.
Yeah.
And he's stuck to it, and the higher ups at Microsoft and the board have let him do it. And I think this is the biggest. Certainly, we thought the Bethesda thing would be the biggest power play in that department, and here we go. Now we've even gone bigger than that.
And SJ Warner Matt also points out, because coming from, if you look at sports television, which I know SJ Warner Matt, he's big into sports. I'm also big into sports. By the way, Georgia defeated Alabama 33-18 in the college football national championship that last week. So we are national champions of the college football world. Thank you. Congratulations to me and my alma mater. Anyway, SJ Warner Matt says, when Disney acquired part of 20th Century Fox, they acquired Fox Sports. With that, they acquired the regional sports networks along with them, like Fox Sports South, Fox Sports SoCal, stuff like that. Those regional sports networks did a lot of team broadcasting for sports, so Disney had to sell off all those regional sports networks to make the 20th Century deal work, because Disney owns ESPN. And so the DOJ didn't want Disney to own both the national and the regional sports in all of these markets, which is why all the Fox Sports regional networks got renamed to Bally Sports and got sold off to Sinclair Media. So there could be some interesting portions of that, like maybe, just kind of spitballing. King has to be spun off. The mobile games, like Microsoft can't have the mobile game publisher, or taking pieces of that. Maybe some of their existing stuff they'll have to get rid of. Like I honestly don't know, what that would really look like. But that is the type of stuff that the DOJ may require.
Yeah. And I'm not sure where the cards are in that either, because, something else to consider is that, again, this is not going to be finalized until 2023. We're going to have some political changes that come with the mid-year terms and all that. So it's going to be very, and if tea leaves are to be believed, a lot of people feel like the House and those oversight committees are going to fall into the hands of another political party. So it could change who's really in control at the end of the day and gets to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, but I think the idea of spinning off King, because Microsoft's mobile strategy doesn't seem to be anything but the cloud, right? It makes a lot of sense as to something they could kind of offload. I feel terrible saying that about the hardworking people at King, as if they're their own, not their own company that's done great things and so forth. But it is an interesting prospect for sure.
Yeah, and Reddertainment in chat, good to see you, Reddertainment. How you doing? Says, as a part of their deal to buy Fox, Disney had to sell their stake in Hulu. Will Microsoft have to sell off one or more first-person franchises as part of this, like Call of Duty, Halo, Gears, or Overwatch? Will they maybe go to the franchise level? Like, no, you can't own all the good first-person shooters. That, I think, would be a harder sell.
DOJ is intelligent enough to drill things down that specifically to like what the good first-person shooters are.
Yeah. So
I just don't. I don't see it. I see it more as like the type of company type of level, and one of their many acquisitions maybe having to go. But I don't. Again, nothing makes sense except for. That's been said so far, except for King.
Yeah.
I hate to say it.
Yeah. So
we'll see.
Yeah. So that's the big question. Like, I actually believe this is going to happen. In 18 months, we'll be talking about how the deal is closed, but I don't think it's going to look like the way it looks today. I think there's going to be some concessions made, either as they don't buy every part of this service of ABK, or maybe they get rid of something they already had and sell it off or spin it off or something like that. I think that's what we're going to see. I can't see Microsoft just getting rid of the Xbox brand completely. I can't see them doing that. But I mean, considering that, Xbox has its own CEO, it kind of is its own company just owned by Microsoft. So
it's similar like the Facebook Instagram thing, or excuse me, Meta Instagram thing.
Yeah.
So I think Xbox is basically Instagram of sorts at this point.
Yeah.
But again, at the end of the day, this is all about Xbox Game Pass. What else is out there like Game Pass? Other cloud-based gaming services, but Microsoft has no stake in Stadia, Lumia, or whatever. Like maybe they have to put their games on some of those services to help break that illusion of anti-competitiveness, or that whole thing. I just don't see it going much beyond that. I kind of think because of the government changes that are unfortunately likely to happen in 2022, I think this deal goes right through.
Yeah. S. Jeremy Matt says it's going to take 18 months minimum for this sale to go through, and it will undoubtedly take longer. Either way, we won't see the fruits of it until 2024. But yeah, that week when it goes through and it's finalized, that's going to be a big week on Game Pass.
I think we see stuff before then. I really do. But I don't think it's going to be things like a World of Warcraft subscription is bundled in with Game Pass or anything like that. I don't think you see anything like that for a good long time. But
now you definitely won't see bundled in with Game Pass as a perk a subscription to that critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV, which is about to once again have a free trial that gets you up to anyway.
But I do think something like the Diablo 2 remaster hits Game Pass in 6 months.
Yeah.
Before this is done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Black Compat, interesting kind of, a lot of people are looking at EA right now, right? Like, does Sony buy EA? No, I don't think that's what happens. And not to misquote, because Black and Pat says, I do think this puts EA off the table as a potential target, though. For all the negativity EA's gotten online over the years, when it comes to the workplace culture, EA has not been under the microscope the way many of their peers have been.
Not recently.
I think I think the one that would be on the table, if anything, is Ubisoft, but I don't think Sony's buying Ubisoft. I don't see it.
Yeah. No, EA actually was the first company to be under the microscope. We have to go all the way back, once again, vintage gamer hat, here going back to LiveJournal and the LiveJournal days.
Yeah, you gotta go. Yeah.
EA Spouse. So EA Spouse was a LiveJournal account of a spouse of somebody who worked at EA and detailed the crunch time and the emotional toll it was taking on her spouse. I think like later on, she's been identified, he's been identified, and all that stuff. But it was an anonymous LiveJournal account, and that was the first time that we ever got any kind of expose into working conditions in the game industry. But more recently, we haven't heard that much about EA. People hate loot boxes, but even people I know that hated EA and said that EA sucks all the time, they've even warmed up to EA a little bit more because they're not the biggest evil in the industry anymore. And they do still have the top selling video game in the world. It's just it's one that we don't play here in America. It's called FIFA, which is not going to be FIFA anymore because FIFA's tired of EA. And
in America they just play Madden.
Yes,
which is also EA. So
yeah. And Black Compat says, I don't see Yves Guillemot letting Ubisoft go for all he's worth. I don't see that either.
Here's the thing. I respect that opinion, but I would have said the same thing about Kotick and Activision yesterday.
Yeah. But
money talks.
No, but here's the thing. Is Ubisoft publicly traded? Because Activision's publicly traded. It's not up to Bobby Kotick.
Big difference. You're right.
Yeah. And also, here was another, everybody's like, who's left? Bandai Namco. is one of the publishers that's left. Because if you just joined us way back in our chat room, somebody's like, well, now who's left if Microsoft and Sony's bought everybody? And we're like, well, EA, Take-Two, Ubisoft and stuff, Square Enix.
There's always going to be new studios that form. There are going to be talent within this organization that decide they are happier doing something else. This is where so many big indie hits come from, right? Even former Blizzard staff that are not a part of this whole merger, they're going to be doing their own thing and so forth. So I think that's a story that's always going to be a thing in this industry, is that people are going to spin off from the big companies and start something indie, start something smaller, and then you have that big indie breakthrough that gets everybody talking and ends up being something that gets bought too. Minecraft.
Yeah.
But you want to take a great example of a company that was in shitty hands beforehand, and then they got bought. I mean, look at who created Minecraft and what a dum-dum he was.
Yeah.
And now, he got a big buyout. He bought Beyonce's house from the whole thing. And now he's, but he's not in, he's not in the picture anymore. And Mojang is, Minecraft, especially if you were to ask Loki, is as good as it's ever been. Better. It's still flourishing all these years later. Yeah. So hopefully it's a promising prospect for Activision, Blizzard, etc.
Yeah, and Questbuster says, yes, Ubisoft does trade. A few years ago, Ubisoft had to fend off a takeover attempt by Vivendi with Tencent's help.
Right, that's right. I remember that, the Tencent thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so they are publicly traded. So it's not up to Eves. Like, if the board decides, and, once you go public, that's the way it is. Now, a company that, we can sit here and actually say, no, that won't sell, is Valve. Because Valve is owned by Gabe Newell. It's not publicly traded, and they are very purposely not publicly traded because they don't want that kind of influence. So yeah, D5T, who D5T, by the way, he's in our chat room. How you doing? He used to run a fan site for a certain game. Maybe you can guess when I say what he says, what game he ran a fan site from. We need someone to buy Namco Bandai and create a new .hack game.
I think just because, going back to the current headline, I think just because, again, suddenly Microsoft has access to all these, moldy Activision IPs, don't expect those games anytime soon. But you know what? In the next few years, could we get something in that? Could we get Geometry Wars 4? Absolutely.
Yeah. SJ Roman says, I think the running joke in tech is that if you have a startup that does reasonably well, you'll eventually get acquired by Google. Yes, that great startup Activision, which itself was trying to just distance itself from the corporate culture of Atari, because Atari didn't want to acknowledge them.
You know where my brain goes? My brain goes to the other story where Google had this little company that they created in-house called Niantic, which the guy from Google Maps had a huge hand in making. And they made some games. And then they signed a really big contract one day that they were very hush-hush about. And suddenly Niantic became its own company. And it spun off from Google. And then it was revealed that, they landed the rights because that Pokemon parody on Google Maps went a really long way. So, interesting.
Now, Red Entertainment's bringing up, the actual largest game company in the world, the actual largest game publisher in the world, Tencent. Tencent might be in some trouble running forward since Chinese regulators haven't approved any new video games since July of 2021. Yeah, that's a wild story about what's going on over there and how many, I think 14,000 developers or development studio had to shut down because China's like, no, you can't publish. We're not letting you. I know some articles said 140,000. That was apparently a typo. It's just everybody ran with the typo because the original article had the typo in it, which it's been changed, but it's a lot better to say 140,000 companies shut down. But Tencent, I think, will be fine because Tencent for a while really did start making inroads outside of the Chinese market. Epic Games, for one.
Riot.
You know, and Riot. So their Tencent's going to be fine. If Tencent was just in China, yeah, they would be in trouble, but they're not. They have learned not to put all your eggs in one basket or in one country, and that's what they're doing, and they will survive. And that's why, like Zynga, you know, for a while we thought they were going to be going under because they put all their eggs in the Facebook basket, and you know the original Farmville. And they were in trouble because Facebook was going to start shutting off the things that made Farmville work. Facebook started removing that type of stuff. And now you can't make that type of game on Facebook. That's not what Facebook does anymore. And that almost killed Zynga because they just put all their eggs in the Facebook basket.
No more game notifications on Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Tencent will be fine. But yeah, I don't know where else we want to go with this. It's
been a big day.
Yeah,
it's been a big day, and there's much more to come. I'd be curious to see what happens to the investigation from here. If it just ends up getting dropped because now it's shown that, you know, a new company is going to come in and call the shots. I that's kind of what I'm very curious to see what happens with that from here.
Yeah, and I mean, there are still going to be, I believe somebody said there were going to be civil suits against Bobby Kotick, and he's going to have to fend off those for years, and those aren't going to stop just because this was announced. Those are going to continue. The legal process is slow, but it's still going to continue for the next 18 months at the very least. And then they'll still have to, Microsoft takes in all that responsibility, so whatever legal action is still pending at that point, that's now Microsoft's burden. And it's their cross to bear.
I think the more interesting thing to keep an eye on in the more immediate future is all this, you know, the chess pieces moving in a certain configuration over at Sony about maybe them finally trying to make a move on Game Pass and what that really looks like. Is that a PlayStation Now, Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, you know, cloud game meets, you know, kind of a mix of download and cloud. What does that look like on Sony's end, and what games do they include with it, and what deals did they sign? Because Microsoft's made it very clear today. They believe the Game Pass is the future.
Yep.
So we'll see if Sony has that same perception or not.
And if we look at it from the perspective of like some of the Sony news that's going on this past couple of weeks, they've started removing PlayStation Now gift cards from stores in other countries, not here in the US, but like over in Europe. They are winding down PlayStation Now as it is today. And they're doing that by, you know, removing it off store shelves and getting rid of that shelf space. So they're not misleading people. That way they can flip a switch, turn it into something else, rebrand it, use some of that same technology, the old Gaikai technology, the Todd Perry, I can't remember, but his company that got bought by Sony, and it was a cloud streaming service. This was in the same breath as OnLive, but there was Gaikai, and that's what became PlayStation Now.
A very fascinating question that I think worth bringing up from Black and Pat in our chat, who says, "Does Sony even have a cloud?"
Yes.
Well, do you recall a headline from 2 months ago?
Yeah.
In fact, I was like, I swear this was a thing. I just Googled it, and a headline from Microsoft's press center in May of 2019.
Yeah.
Sony and Microsoft to explore strategic partnership.
Yeah.
So
Sony's cloud is Azure.
Yeah, Sony's cloud is Azure.
Yeah, David Perry was the name I was thinking of.
That's how Microsoft is able to get away with this acquisition.
Yeah, because they're providing they can provide the cloud technology to the other competitor in the space.
So maybe this has been coming for a while. Who knows?
Yeah, because I know that Microsoft's wanted to play nice with Sony because Microsoft's been in second place in the gaming sphere. You know, the PS5's been doing much better than the Xbox. And Sony was the one that was like, no, we're not going to play nice. And then, you know, now we're gonna see if Sony accepts the help, because maybe if Sony doesn't accept the help from Microsoft, does that what would that mean for the monopoly or something? Because if they're like, no, we're not going to do that, because Amazon is Microsoft's big competitor in the cloud technology space, and Amazon can do game streaming too. They've got their Luna. Google also has cloud stuff. They've got Stadia, so they've all got the infrastructure to do it. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting what a lot of people with higher pay grades than me and you, what they come up with for this. But the bottom line is they've announced that their intentions, that's what this was. We are intending to make a full purchase. And then it's going to go through a lot of revisions. And then Bobby Kotick will be gone in 18 months is all the indications. They have not said that officially because they probably are not allowed to legally. I will just say that when you see for over the next 18 months, this is a trick when you read articles on major websites like The Verge or IGN or CNET or Ars Technica or any of these sites that are saying covering this. When you see the phrase "sources close to the company say," or someone familiar with the situation says, that is just about always the normal PR person or the normal spokesperson who usually gets quoted saying something they don't want quoted to them and don't want attributed to them. But it is the same person that is saying it, and that is what is called off the record. So when they'll say, I'm telling you this off the record, the journalists will go back and say, well, sources close to the situation believe that blah, 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 which is what they were told off the record, because what a lot of PR people will do is they want to give color to the situation to the journalist without explicitly printing that color. They want to explain why certain things are happening to help the journalist phrase their coverage and get it right. Because even though journalists want a scoop, the good journalists also want the right scoop, and they want to understand it and show it that way. They're not all evil, I promise. So a PR person, good spokesperson, will give off the record color to the journalist to then frame the story, and they will put that in as sources close to the situation believe, blah, 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 blah. But that's not the company didn't officially say it, but the company totally said it.
Yep.
So I think that that was a nice long roundtable. That was fun.
Gone for over an hour. So, and there's more to come on this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting the next 18 months.
But I'm glad that we were able to hop on tonight and do this. Hopefully news like this, earth-shattering news, doesn't happen all the time. But it's nice to know that we have an audience here that enjoys watching us talk about it. Thanks for being here. Yeah. So we are the Voice Geeks Network, twitch.tv/VOG Network. You're probably already there, or on our YouTube channel. You're already there as well. We are a podcast network and streaming network about geek culture. So not just video games, but also anime. We have Anime Jam Session. They actually are not going on until tomorrow night. Usually they would be going live right about now, or they would have already been live. I was told they are actually going in there because of the Monday being a holiday. They're doing tomorrow night instead. But we have them. And then on Sunday nights, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, I am Bobby Blackwolf, and I host the Bobby Blackwolf Show from this room right here. This is me, and I talk about video games, and I don't get to speak for a whole hour on a single topic, which is the other reason why I wanted to do this, to kind of go a little bit more in depth, because I only can go maybe 10, 20, maybe if I stretch it 30 minutes onto a single topic. But that is me, and then right after me is Rob's show. Me
and my friends, Orange Lounge Radio, Sunday night, 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern, where we would talk for an hour about this, that's for sure. But, we have a 3-hour-ish show to get into, all the details and talk with you guys, most importantly, get all the perspectives from around the gaming world on our long running, 20 years now, video game show.
Yeah, 20 years. I've only been doing this. I've only been doing this for about 16 and a half years. So, I'm not there yet.
Baby.
I know. So
episode 900 this weekend. By the way. Just
congratulations on that. I think I'm at like 792, so I'm getting close to 800.
Yeah, with 20 years and weekly shows, we should be at like 1,040, but everyone gets we do believe in time off once in a while, so we don't do a show every week because, you know, holidays. But hey, still 900 episodes is a lot, especially when they're at least 2 hours a piece, right?
Yeah.